What's happening, guys? It's Curtis here from the Social Work Race podcast. Today, we are talking about white supremacy in social services. Would you believe it? Now, you know, this podcast is all about learning, especially for those where my heart sits, the newly qualified and the social work students. This is for you, but this is for everybody. You know that already. You know my platform. And welcome to you if you've just been introduced to it. So today, we're talking about a really interesting topic because for my PhD, my assignment was to look at disproportionality in the field of social services. Let's be clear. I want to start here. White supremacy. White supremacy is not about the hate, is not only about the hatred of others, darker skinned people, other ethnicities. That's not the type of white supremacy we're talking about. We're talking about how white supremacy has dominated and been at the core, the foundation of many structures and perspectives and lenses in society. It means that what we see and how we perceive things, how we do things, is through a more, you could say, Eurocentric lens. So how we see behaviors, how we see the concerns and risks when it comes to social services, the needs of others, and how we see people, and it gets deep in terms of psychological approaches, how we see people if they are well or not. And we know systemically forever that black people and white people are diagnosed with the same symptoms, but have different diagnoses in mental health. So there is a challenge there when it comes to us understanding the Eurocentric or white supremacy structures. And what has that got to do with it? I'll break it down. A lot of the literature that we have to understand humanity and how to help them is through a Eurocentric lens. But when you dig into the systems and the outcomes of all these systems that we have in place, something interesting shows up. And community care and the government have actually noted and recognized the problem. I'm going to show you something, okay? I have to read it to you because, you know, the memory. The UK government further corroborates the issue, indicating that children from black, minority, ethnic, some people call it global majority, but in the UK, we are about 4% of the population that is minorities. Black and minority ethnic backgrounds are significantly overrepresented when it comes to children's services, black people are overrepresented in child protection plans. What's going on there? And as of March 2020, black children made up about 10% of the children on child protection plans. However, they only make up about 4% of the children or child population. So that's disproportionate, right? That means that if they were in society, 4% of the population, they should then account for roughly 4% of the child protection plans at most. So in the last, say, 3, 4, 5 years, we've had a massive increase in the international social work population. And what has that got to do with it? So really, we've had like about 175% increase of overseas applications for social workers in the UK. And the thing about it is that a lot of them come from, or the vast majority come from Zimbabwe and South Africa, which is second. But let me read this to you. Black and minority ethnic social workers and their practice sees higher rates of disciplinary actions and referrals to fitness to practice processes. For instance, a Social Work England report that black social workers, who represent about 16% of registered practitioners, 16, accounted for 1/3. So that's double. That's like 33% of cases referred to fitness to practice hearings. That's a massive overrepresentation. And these social workers are nearly twice, that's 50% now, are nearly twice as likely to have their cases progress from initial examination to a hearing compared to their white counterparts. And this trend is mirrored in findings from a skills to care study, which showed that black minority ethnic staff were 40% more likely to enter formal disciplinary processes and more than twice as likely to face fitness to practice inquiries compared to their white counterparts. Additionally, minority workers, social workers, let alone the care staff, reported experiencing higher levels of workplace bullying, harassment, and harassment, and were 20% more likely to report abuse from service users and 30% more likely to experience bullying from their colleagues. I'll tell you a quick story actually, because whilst I step off script, I've spoken to a couple of colleagues as a social worker, and one of them told me, my colleagues, these are minorities, these are international social workers. I've been working with them for years in various local authorities. And this particular social worker told me, in the team that I went to, the staff are clearly, the minority staff are clearly ostracized. And I'm watching this. It hasn't quite happened to me, but I'm watching it with them, and they just sit there and take it, right? And she said, on that basis, I'm out of this local authority. But she said to me, don't talk to me, talk to this other person who's not in the team. She was once there. So I spoke to this person and she said, absolutely, it's happening. So I said to them, why haven't you said anything? She goes, I spoke to my manager about it, and my manager said, I've tried my best to deal with it, but it's difficult. And they kind of fobbed off the situation. And I said, well, why haven't you taken it further? She said, because I have to consider my own mental health and well-being. Do I have the energy to do my job and do this? And not everyone does. And that's how a lot of this is perpetuated, because Black people or minorities, or in particular, international social workers, will feel that they are on their back foot. And if I complain, maybe my status in this country or my job is in jeopardy. And so let me keep my mouth shut and live with this. Goes deeper. So it looks like, in summary, before I go deeper, that the service user in social services, that is the adults and the children and the families, both divisions, and the social worker have the same outcomes. They are more than twice or thereabouts, twice as likely to either be questioned about their practice or their risks or concerns. They're more likely to be brought to fitness to practice. They're more likely to be questioned about their practice. They're more likely to be questioned about their cultures and what they bring to social services. What we see, there's a lot going on there. And what I want is for there to be a conversation about why that is. And that's not for this podcast. But let's go a little bit deeper. Now, you have to understand, what I'm giving you is from the research I've done from my assignment, okay? Let me read it to you. Let me just read a paragraph to you. It says, so we want to explore the deeper experiences of the international social worker in British society. And this may account for some of the challenges in their performance. And one of the issues that I believe from research that international social workers have is that they have multiple identities, which is defined as needing to adopt multiple ethnicities and cultures in order to attempt to assimilate. People who adopt multiple identities tend to face greater levels of discrimination. This is crazy. Placing them in an ambiguous position within society, leading to significant stress and mental health issues. And these challenges will negatively impact their performance. So it's almost like they're trying to, if you speak to West Indians, I challenge any white professional, manager, especially managers, I want you to become in touch with what's really going on. There's something called code switching. That means that as West Indians, we will alter the way we speak depending on who we're talking to. Doesn't always happen, but a lot of West Indians will do it, okay? That's been a thing since we were growing up as children. It might happen less so with the younger cohorts, but me, I'm from West Indian background. And so I have to code switch depending on who I'm talking to. Code switching is I will alter my language and my code and my conduct so that I am not, why am I doing that? So that I'm not judged in a negative way, so that I'm not seen in a way that is known as probably lower class or unworthy or questionable. We code switch. So when minorities come here from recently decolonized, not even fully decolonized, but officially decolonized countries, these countries have been left with a horrible, very recent history of marginalization and racism. They come to the UK. The question is, how do they see themselves before they arrive? And when they arrive and are surrounded by white managers, white staff who are a part of the country, how do minorities see themselves? And a part of their survival mechanism is to adopt two identities and try to fit in, but it's extremely difficult. And in some ways it doesn't work. And if they struggle to adapt certain elements of themselves, it puts an undue stress on them and it impacts their capacity to perform at their best. This is just probably one of the reasons why minorities are struggling. We could say, actually, they're not as skilled. I don't know about that. We could say that their capacity to do the job is impaired because maybe they're foreign. Or is it because the Eurocentric lens by which we see everybody is the dominant feature? And that needs to be in question. Hey, the UK is dependent and has, since at least World War II, since this international slave trade, which has been dead for about 150 years, not long. But I recall my grandmother, who died at 96, telling me stories about 10 years ago, when she arrived to this country. There was, and we know officially, there was a great need for minorities to come here because the economy was low, and yet again we needed workers. And so we invite people here, but we don't welcome people here. And whilst I might be white and not racist, there are more questions around the system that we have in this country, that it may say one thing but actually do another, that it may purport something, equality and diversity, but in practice it looks very different to the international. It looks different to black people. And what do black people need to do to survive? We need to adopt skills, and that eats of skills to cope, and that eats into our capacity to perform. There are people in this country that have never had to consider the color, the weight of the color of their skin, and sometimes their color of their skin, it could be perceived that there is no weight at all. Whereas some people, their accent, the shape of their nose, their lips, their cheeks, the color of their skin, their hair, and the thoughts of how others see them are a barrier and are sucking up capacity. And if we are depending on foreign countries to support the care system, we have to do better. And this is just, 2 paragraphs from my assignment. There needs to be more discussions about this, but I will say that England can do better. It can do better if it wants to. But this is a snapshot of white supremacy. White supremacy, I'm just going to reiterate, it's not about hatred for, but really recognizing that the foundations are Eurocentric. But what does that mean when we call people to this country to help this country function, but don't know how to support them when they get here? Food for thought. Take care of yourselves.